I am so excited to be with you this afternoon. And so thank you for still being here. You can continue to enjoy your lunch. I was going to thank you for staying awake, but I think it'll be up to us to keep the energy going. I am Crystal Nicole Donovan, and I'm going to be your moderator this afternoon. Has this not been an amazing symposium? Like, I really, yes, clap. I am just grateful to be here, grateful to be part of NeoMed, the Department of Psychiatry, and just excited about what Ohio Program of Campus Safety, what they are doing, and what they are going to be doing in the future. So we are going to now dive in and discuss how we can all, and I really want to stress that, how we can all support LGBTQ plus students on campus. I'm going to provide a very brief introduction of myself, and then I will pass the mic to our esteemed panelists. So when I was asked, like, why is this topic important to you? Why are you here? This was the first thing I thought about. My first hairstylist was a trans woman. I was a little person with a lot of hair, so please don't judge my mother. Um, she just needed some help. And as a child, I was just excited. Again, I'm in this space that was very adult like, with this beautiful spirit and someone that had such nurturing hands. But also as a child, and I didn't have the language, I understood that not everyone loved her like I did. And I also quickly learned that she was not safe in all spaces. As I mentioned, my title here at NeoMed, so I am part of the BEST Center, Best Practices in Schizophrenia Treatment. Talk a lot about first episode psychosis. I'm a consultant and trainer for our first episode psychosis program. So we essentially are at the other end of crisis. Our program really is trying to intervene early so that people can get what they need and be out in the community living their best lives. If you want to know more about the program, you can see me after the symposium. But I tell people I'm always, regardless of my job title, I'm a social worker first. And the chicken or the egg, I don't know what came first. I really believe that just, as I mentioned in my previous slide, there was always this little social justice spirit. And social work was a discipline that most aligned with my values. And so we're going to get into that and think about what's going on. I tell people all the time social work is political. And social work is not perfect. Code of ethics is not perfect. A lot of reckoning, but it's a mandate. It's right there, right? Social and political action. Social workers should engage in social and political action. Social workers should be aware of the impact of the political arena on practice and should advocate for change, right? So, again, why am I here? This is why I'm here. These are just a list of supportive resources, and we'll not go into it. In the interest of time, I will reference the Trevor Project a couple times. You can look Trevor Project up on the socials. And they are a leading organization, a national organization, but we are going to highlight some local and state resources as well. And the last thing I'll leave you with in regard to my introduction is I used to teach part-time at a local university. And one of my favorite classes was Intro to Social Work Practice. So that was the class people were taking right before they applied for the program. And so when we were doing our little icebreakers, I would always ask the students, tell us why you're here, but they could not say they wanted to help people. And initially, they were a little taken back. They didn't know what to do with that. That tends to be a go to answer. But many of them paused. They started thinking critically. They started thinking about even if, say, I wanted to help people that were unhoused, great, get them housing, but why are people unhoused? And by the end of the semester, they understood that they were not there to help anyone and ultimately realized that all of our liberation is tied up together.
Hi, everyone. I'm Savannah Carlstrom Page. I use she and they pronouns. I'm the Director of Behavioral Health and Clinical Services at Kaleidoscope Youth Center. And Kaleidoscope is Ohio's largest and longest standing center that serves specifically LGBTQIA plus young people. So we serve youth and young adults between the ages of 12 and 24. We're most known for our drop-in center, which operates similar to an after-school program. We run support groups, affinity groups, life skills training, one-on-one supportive conversations, all sorts of fun stuff happens in the drop-in center. But we also offer housing and case management services for our folks 18 to 24. And most recently, and most exciting to me, is our behavioral health and clinical services department, which is our newest, started in 2021 when I joined the organization. And we're able to offer at no charge to any of our young folks one-on-one as well as group therapy. And that serves both our folks in housing, folks who come through our drop-in center, and folks in the community.
Thank you, Savannah. Harley.
Hi, everyone. I'm Harley Rubin. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a second year MSW student about to graduate in about a month. I am hopefully also licensed. I'm the Master of Social Work student representative for the Ohio chapter of the National Association of Social Workers. I am also the Vice President of Equity and Inclusion for the Graduate Student Council at CASE. I've had a really busy year. And I'm also, my fieldwork placement currently is at University Hospitals, focusing on gender affirming care and working in the HIV/AIDS outpatient clinic. And I also wanted to say that like what I'm bringing to this is, my own queer identity, and then also my experience as a student and my experience as a suicide attempt survivor. Thank you.
And last but not least, Dr. Joe.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Krivis. I'm an assistant professor of counseling at John Carroll University. So the only counselor up here. I feel outnumbered with my social work colleagues here. I have been involved in LGBT mental health care for the last 9 years. I worked with Signature Health to start an LGBT-specific intensive outpatient program for co-occurring mental health and addiction work. And that ignited a passion for me, especially in working with the trans community. And it was sort of that tale as old as time. Oh, wow, trans people are just neat. I really love them. I love this work. And oh, maybe I'm part of that community. So I identify as non-binary, and I hope to bring that to the conversation as well. Clinically speaking, I work primarily with adolescents and adults with religious trauma. And I've sort of fallen backwards into a space of creating dialogue between Catholic schools, the Catholic Church, and the LGBT community. John Carroll created that on accident, so grateful to them. And I look forward to being with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would say this conversation is relevant and timely. As Dr. Swanborough Becker was talking about Florida, I was thinking Ohio does not have any room to criticize. It seems like we are working really hard to unfortunately catch up. According to the Trevor Project, 41% of LGBTQ plus young adults have seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year, and young people who are transgender, non-binary, or people of color reported higher rates than their peers. So we're just going to get right into our questions. Are there unique factors which impact the mental health of LGBTQ plus young adults, and what are those factors? And there's no order.
They both looked at me. So I'm sure many of us are aware of the concept of minority stress. So the minority stress model explains why we see higher rates of suicidality, mental health challenges, and addiction amongst LGBT and other marginalized groups without pathologizing those identities or moralizing those identities. And it suggests that navigating a world that's not exactly designed for you is inherently more stressful. And this doesn't have to stem from violence or overt discrimination necessarily. An example being when my husband and I went to get our marriage license in Medina County, it said husband and wife on the certificate. So, we had a good laugh at that, but we also have a great support system. So, folks with more isolation or less grounding in resilience may find that to be stressful or othering, or downright depressing or anxiety provoking about their safety. So I'd offer that as one backdrop that everything's a little bit harder. An LGBT student managing their first year on campus has additional stressors, and I would say especially being at a Catholic institution, which is trying to figure out how to be inclusive, we can add those extra layers of identity and religion, race and ethnicity, and many others.
Yeah, that was really like everything I had written down. And I think that was a really eloquent way to describe minority stress. And isolation really, I think, are the two main things. The oppression aspect. And like, as I think many people know, trans people are less than 1% of the population. So students also feel like they can be completely alone or separated if they're not connected to a community at their schools. A lot of like online support is where people get socialization. So isolation is definitely a factor too.
Yeah, I would co-sign all of that. I also love the minority stress model, and I also think it's like just an interesting way to say oppression, to say discrimination, and that's the factor. That's what's happening. And I would add, part of what we think about a lot at KYC is the factor of adultism specifically, and adultism being our way of framing ageism as it applies to our young folks, and the assumptions that our society holds that adults always know more, that more life experience always equals more knowledge and more power and control. And so I think that impacts our LGBTQIA plus young folks in really specific ways. Because of their youth, they are assumed to not be able to know themselves. We don't trust them when they tell us who they are. We don't listen to them when they tell us what they need very often. And thinking about that on a campus as you're trying to navigate it and trying to step into adulthood and claim identity gets really challenging if you're being questioned and sort of undermined in your own selfhood.
Thank you. And I appreciate you highlighting like some of those everyday stressors, some of the everyday discrimination that just after a while can just start wearing you down. Thank you for that. Correctly identifying students by their correct name and pronouns is crucial in affirming gender identity. However, creating an affirming and safe environment is so much more. How can faculty and staff begin weaving safety into the work that they are doing every single day?
I'd love to start with this one. So last year I was at the LGBT Center at Case, and one of the things that I think was really wonderful is we did faculty and staff allyship and pronouns trainings. And specifically for pronouns, like I still want to talk about that piece because I think it is really lost for a lot of people. One of the things in the workshop that I did was practice and teaching people not only how to practice, but also to practice in general. I think people don't realize they can do that. And so being able to go home and do your dishes and tell a story about a person who uses they, them pronouns, like you have to get in the mindset, you have to use your thoughts before your actions, before you can expect yourself to just be able to do it perfectly. So that's one of the things I'd really say is to like start with the name and pronouns, but also when we also do that training, when we did, another important piece is talking to faculty who don't use the pronouns and names, who express things like, I don't know what it's all about. I don't get it. I kind of refuse to do that. I think we have a responsibility to talk to people around us. And that's really how I'd answer this question is to do your best to do like ongoing learning and be involved, but also to talk to others, like even in your personal life, in your family. I think that's huge. And then political engagement is really, really important here. I think policies on our campuses, and specifically working in a hospital right right now, like the intake form didn't have gender or pronouns on it, and that was something that I pushed to fix. And so I think when we think about different places on campus and the demographic information, making sure to have that. Oh, and the last one I thought of is curriculum, and making sure that any of our curriculum is inclusive of different types of people.
I again would co-sign everything, and I would add, just to get a little specific, thinking about that advocacy and political engagement piece. There's a lot of opportunity right now. Most specifically, I'm thinking about House Bill 183, which is Ohio's trans bathroom ban, anti-trans bathroom bill. There's an opportunity there to call your House representatives, speak to them about that, tell them you don't want that passed. It's just made moves in the House this week very, very quickly. And beyond that, to then stand up for doing the right thing, the ethical thing on campus. Very much in favor of making good trouble. So I would encourage you to make good trouble regardless of what our lawmakers say. And keep yourself safe and work in networks and community. Making good trouble by yourself is not a good idea, but make good trouble together and fight things like that, because a bathroom ban does not make our students safe.
I think in addition to what my colleagues have offered, I'd offer a micro level suggestion and a bit more of a macro level suggestion. So part of creating that space where we recognize name and pronouns as essential is recognizing we're going to make mistakes. I'd say 85-90% of my clients are queer or trans, and I unfortunately still misgender people occasionally. The important thing is to respond not out of a place of shame, but of a place of understanding, learning, and growing. So I think as allies or supports, we may feel the inclination to say, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, to make sort of a production out of your mistake as a way of honoring it. We can accidentally put a lot of emotional labor on the person who we've just kind of made this mistake with. So it may be more useful and supportive to simply correct ourselves and move forward with it, to show the evidence that I have caught it. And I want to do better. So I'm going to retrain my brain and neurons right here in the moment. Or if it is pointed out to you of, hey, you've just made this mistake, perhaps the best response is to say thank you, repeat, and move forward. So this is suggesting this isn't just a safe space sticker we're putting up. This isn't a training I was required. I want to do better. I want to do the best I can, knowing that's not going to be perfect. And I think the larger scale intervention would be while we're advocating, especially for these legal challenges. House Bill 68 banning youth trans healthcare would be another one I would highlight. Goes into effect later this month. Is to utilize different communication styles, such as nonviolent communication, which seeks to create a dialogue between groups that feel a significant divide. I think a lot of how data is presented is intended to be divisive and to disintegrate our connections as people. And regardless of our backgrounds, regardless of even deeply held beliefs that we may find quite objectionable in someone else, we're all hopefully striving to be as happy and as healthy as possible. And if nothing else, there can be that grain of sand that creates the pearl of let's create dialogue that matters here and understand why safe access to things as foundational as healthcare and bathrooms is not going to harm anyone in the process.
Thank you. Some common themes I heard were community and grace. Based on prior experiences, LGBTQ plus students might be apprehensive to report discrimination or harassment. How can reporting bias, harassment, and Title IX violations contribute to belonging and well-being for LGBTQ plus students?
I can go. Get out there.
So I think these institutional aspects can sort of hit us as this is an obligation. And I liken it, as a panel of mental health professionals, we're mandated reporters. And I know there's many of us in the room that are as well. So I think how we carry that mantle and communicate that to students is important. This isn't an obligation, this is a responsibility. My intention to help in whatever capacity I do, staff, teaching, mental health professional, is to uplift you. So, in our counseling and therapy rooms, one of the first things we do is review that with people. And as faculty, I would encourage you to consider that in your syllabus day to say, hey, here are the things I am obligated to report. Here are the things that I take seriously enough that make our community unsafe and I want to take action with. And that allows students to do one of two things: decide you're the safe person to come talk to, or to know the line in the sand of, if I'm not ready for this to kind of climb that ladder of institutional response, I may take this to my personal counselor, or I may take this to friends, family, someone else supportive, because victims or people who have been marginalized always have the right to say, I don't feel safe enough to proceed with this investigation. So it's important to let them know, I'm here as a resource either way, but here's the line in the sand, and you matter whichever way you decide to respond.
Yeah, I think what I would highlight about that is the power of choice. Anytime harm has occurred to a person, often a big part of what stays with someone in that harm is the lack of choice, or the stuckness, or the trapped feeling that happened in whatever harm occurred. And I think a huge part of healing and increasing a sense of safety moving forward is bringing choice and personal power back into that. And so, that sort of like informed consent conversation of, this is what I would be required to do if I learn these things. You get to decide how you engage with me around that. And here's all the places that you get to make choices along the way if you're going to go that route with me. And if you're not, here are other resources you could turn to if I'm not the one today. But really making sure that folks are getting to lead their own way through that and be supported through that, and not be dragged through another thing that they didn't want to be dragged through.
Yeah, I wanted to add things specifically from CASE, because I think that's like, I don't know what every university has. So we have like community concerns reporting, and I think that it's a wonderful like anonymous way to, especially for like microaggressions or professors refusing to use pronouns. It's a way to report that stuff. But I am also like because of my role with Graduate Student Council on these diversity leadership meetings, and one of the questions is, what happens to that information? How do we follow up? And so I do think that if that first step there at CASE is really wonderful, and then it's important to also have follow through if you want to have an initiative like that. The other thing I'd say is I really love and am inspired by our sexual assault and Title IX reporting like marketing campaign. It's called It's On Crew, CWRU. So that's kind of how you pronounce it. And it's like in every single bathroom, like the male and female and gender nonconforming bathrooms, like all of them, with like posters and infographics on where to report and how many different places you can find resources and report through. And so, there's also a confidential advocate at CASE, which I'm not sure every university has. And I've talked to her a lot last year, and her schedule is like completely booked, because people just come to talk about what happened to them, and then she can go through the process, decide like, how do we want to report. But at that very basis with Title IX, it has to be reported, but how much information and the next steps that the student takes is completely like within their choice. And I think that's really important too. But I think like, for all of everybody who works on a campus, knowing all the steps and knowing a lot about policy is really important too.
Thank you. I was just thinking, as all three of you were talking, just trauma informed. How can we be trauma informed? We talk about that a lot, but clear communication, right? Providing options, talking about choice. So thank you for your answers.
Crystal, is it okay if I
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I thought of
Your
one
time.
more thing. I wanted to answer the actual what does the reporting do in addition to what Harley has said. And I think confusion, lack of information, and fear in isolation is often what creates hate. So if we can catch bias and have open conversations about that with colleagues on an institutional level, we can hopefully prevent overt harassment or Title IX incidences. So creating communication long before overt violence occurs.
Thank you. I'm thinking about our panel that we had before lunch and interested to hear your response to this question. How can campus safety officers become allies to LGBTQ plus students, specifically as you consider the safety of Black students and other students of color?
All right, I want to go ahead with this one too. This is not to call out, and but I will say that we had an incident when I was working at the LGBT Center, the very first of the semester. I think it was the spring semester. Cutie POC, so it's cute, queer and trans people of color meeting that the LGBT Center was going to have. A campus safety officer showed up unannounced. He was also a Black officer, but he was like there to support and like encourage diversity. He brought a bunch of like merchandise with him from campus safety, and it made the students really, really deeply uncomfortable and upset. And we had to kind of like debrief with the office. Like, why did you do that? You knew it was happening, but like, why this group also and unannounced? And so I wanted like to say in this session that I think it's really important that we like just acknowledge and kind of sit with the distrust that people have of officers and of police. I don't know if it's always something that like, you can strive to do the best you can, but there are students that you aren't going to reach. And the LGBT Center, we also had a day where the campus safety officer came with the dog, and everyone also was very uncomfortable immediately because it's like kind of our safe space, right? And so asking in advance, when can we come by if you want to come to the LGBT Center or speak with queer students, I think putting that responsibility on them or trying to create that dialogue is like really also needs to be trauma informed and needs to like require consent. I will say that our campus safety office has done a good job though with outreach now, and with especially the co-response team that Hillary just talked about in the last panel. They presented at a grad student council meeting of ours, the General Assembly, and like gave us a ton of information on what's happening and what's changing. And I think even just the idea that campus safety really wants to do better and wants to change is great. I do think though with the dog, sometimes people think it's a little manipulative. You got to talk to the cop because they've got a very cute dog. And I'm sorry to make light of it, but it was like a really difficult situation with the LGBT Center, knowing that we want our students to feel absolutely safe and comfortable. And so it's about like kind of navigating that. And I want to say that there's some students that you kind of won't reach, especially because of political opinions, right? And so knowing that and like approaching it that way, you can just be the best you can, but you won't be able to reach everyone.
I really appreciate you starting this conversation that way. That's generally the point that I also wanted to make, that we know that there are really legitimate and genuine reasons for our BIPOC, for our LGBTQIA plus folks, and folks with so many other intersections of neurodivergence, of disability, of size, etc., who have good reason to feel really uncomfortable and really unsafe in the presence of police. At KYC, calling the police is really like very bottom of our list, and police are not invited unless we're in a true emergency. And when we do have our dialogue team that we do have a relationship with come to the center, they are asked to always be in plain clothes, et cetera, all because similarly to other centers, our intention is to be a safer space. And we know that for a large majority of our folks, that can't coincide with a visible police presence. And for some of our folks, the reality is that it's any police presence. And that's a really difficult space to navigate, we lack other resources. We need other safety resources. I think I love hearing about the work with QPR and mental health first aid training. I think that is critical and important. And we need other ways of responding to crisis and ways of responding to safety needs as well. So I think a really important thing to do in solidarity is to encourage resources to also go to other ways of responding. For some instances, yes, a safety officer is probably the right response. And for some instances, it really may not be. And so we need to build communities that have lots of ways of responding and lots of ways of supporting folks. Yeah, end of thought, I think, actually.
The last thing that I would add is acknowledging the discrimination and the hurts that exist. Our safety officers are still in the mix trying to figure out how to manage that. And I think about what our colleagues at Wright State were just speaking about, doing the upstream work to show that as an organization, we are here to serve because power comes from below and lifting up folks who serve rather than being taken. And often we want to put power into those people and institutions that we find trustworthy and that we have relationship with that's based on a track record. So, I think these safety trainings, but also being present more broadly in a way that people of color and queer students are not obligated to interact, perhaps, but have the opportunity to see that we're around and we're trying and we're learning. So I suppose that's probably going to be my tagline for the whole panel, but finding ways to show in a non-performative way that we're doing our best long before it gets to that specific space.
Thank you. And yes to the resources. Just, we think about individuals in under-resourced spaces, and that's where then we're seeing a lot of the thing that we would call crisis, right? And so, yes, I just did a didactic last week, like giving people what they need. So again, they can be in their communities, living their best lives. So the next question is about specialized services and gender affirming services. Specialized services and gender affirming services are often at odds with each other, especially for students with, as we were just talking about, intersecting identities that have been socially and politically marginalized. A Black or Latinx trans student is going to have a different experience than their white peers, and there's no single story for LGBTQ plus students. What recommendations do you have for audience members who are working with students with multiple identities who have been systemically oppressed? And I would say, and how can an individual be an ally, or to push it even further, a true accomplice to a student with multiple identities?
And I think something we see happen often as service providers, practitioners, helpers, folks who care about this type of human to human work is we start to think about our like populations that we work with as our specializations. And I think you can't be a specialist in a person's culture, a person's identity, a person's humanity. And so I think I'm thinking about the importance of remembering that all of the folks that we work with are whole people and we are not specialists in their lives. We can sort of get into these like niches, like, oh, I work with queer folks, I work with the BIPOC folks. But if you work with queer folks, that means you work with BIPOC folks. That means you work with neurodivergent folks. That means you work with disabled folks. That means you work with fat folks, because if you've met a queer person, you've met a queer person. You don't, we're not a monolith, essentially. And so I think that mindset shift of knowing that, like, maybe you're working in community with folks who share similar identities to your own, or you have a special relationship with a person who has a certain identity, and that's why you're pulled to work with that community, or maybe that community just fell in your lap. But remembering that that's not your specialization, that's their lives. And I would also say something that we do at Kaleidoscope, I mentioned earlier, are our affinity groups. So we have affinity groups including Gender Scope is our gender-related one, a Cutie BIPOC group, again, queer and trans, Black and Indigenous and people of color, a space for fat folks, a space for neurodivergent folks. And we try to be really intentional that folks are literally just based on scheduling, not being asked to choose between those things. That our affinity groups are offered at different times and on different days, because it really sucks if the BIPOC group, the QPOC group, is running at the same time as the gender group, and you have to decide between the two. And obviously, sometimes schedules are busy and things do have to run concurrently, and you figure it out. But thinking just really critically about how you plan your offerings, to be intentional in a way that you're not asking folks to choose to only show up as one part of themselves, because the reality is they can't. They are their whole selves the whole time, and it is another one of those like day-to-day factors if folks are asked to step in and out of certain parts of their identity just to be able to access services or support or community.
I think my answers come from a little bit more the therapy room, and I think may scaffold helpfully to other spaces. And that is acknowledging where systems have given us power or privilege in the room, and so that we have a responsibility and an invitation to invite in. The power of broaching these topics can be quite profound in a therapeutic process with someone, and in an attempt to make a space safe for them. So if they've sought you out for concerns about their mental health, or they're having a really strong reaction to campus or state policy or law, to also, depending on the relationship, and we could probably have an 8-hour conversation on this, but say, I'm so glad you've come to speak to me about this. What is that like as a BIPOC person to be talking to your white educator? I don't want to take up space in this conversation, but I also want to acknowledge that that might be in the room for you. And then additionally, I think a well-intentioned thing that we all do is look for connections and share those connections. And the ADHD urge to, oh, I know someone who is, or yeah, that makes me think of this thing I went through. It can accidentally minimize someone's uniqueness, as well as someone's rawness of emotion or response to a specific concern. So be mindful of when that self-disclosure can build a bridge, but also when that self-disclosure might sound a little bit like something from Will and Grace, like, oh, I know this other gay guy who lives in Manhattan. Do you know him? And how isolating and othering that can be.
Yeah, I wanted to talk also, to hit a few of those points too, like leaving room, not fixing everything, feeling okay with being uncomfortable in a conversation with somebody whose identities are very different from yours, like letting silence happen. I think that's how I would build on that one. And then like a note on language, love the word accomplice. I think as policy gets really rough, I think that one's a really important one. You're not only an ally and there for someone and sympathetic, but you're in the fight too, and you're actively working towards a different future. And then I wanted to talk about cultural humility, which is a different term that similar to cultural competence, but the truth is you really can't be competent in someone else's culture, their whole experience. And I think bringing your humble, authentic self into the room is something that's really important. So knowing exactly what your identities are, if you're a therapist or professor, whatever your role is, knowing that power dynamic with the person that you're speaking to, and coming like humble and open to having a conversation, but knowing who you are and your authentic self. I think that one is really key for this conversation. Like you can't assume that you know anything more than your own experiences, and listening first rather than going ahead and making all those connections.
Thank you. Yes, true solidarity is risky. And Maddie, I am paying attention to time. We do not expect faculty, staff, and peers to complete this work in a silo. What campus resources and organizations can be a support for LGBTQ plus students on campus? And of course, we have a second part. What are organizations, including local and grassroots, that can be a resource and potential partner?
Well, I'm always very excited about this one because my first thing that I always say when we talk about policy advocacy in this space right now is that you really need to be following people on social media. It develops way too fast for you to go looking for yourself. I found out in a class in the fall, legislative and political processes, how to track legislation on the Ohio website. I don't think everyone can do that. I don't think everyone should go out there and get email alerts. So I think Equality Ohio, Trans Ohio, Honesty for Ohio Education, Trans Allies, the main ones because they all link to each other: Equality Ohio and Trans Ohio. The ACLU is also doing a lawsuit right now against HB 68, which has already started. Yeah, I'm much more on the higher level of organizations in the state to follow for policy advocacy. I think if you do have an LGBT center on your campus, that's really important. And if you don't, to advocate for one, I would absolutely say that. But I think that wherever you are, one of the things I really like about universities is that you have everyone's email addresses. So you could email somebody at the LGBT center and be like, hey, I'd love to have a chat about how my office can collaborate with you, or what you could need from me, or just to listen to you, especially if you're working in that campus safety officer space. Yeah, but I think those statewide ones are really important to follow to know what's happening right now.
Harley, do you mind naming some of the state organizations again?
Oh, yes. Equality Ohio is like a huge one for policy advocacy, specifically LGBTQ policy advocacy. Trans Ohio has an emergency fund right now that you can donate to, but you can also let people apply to, or if you want to apply yourself for that emergency fund, they've given out a lot of money to families who are seeking care or seeking to move out of the state right now, families with trans youth. Yeah, Trans Allies of Ohio is another organization. Honesty for Ohio Education really focuses on the educational aspect. So HB 8 and HB 183, and I agree, 183 is moving fast. It moved out of committee with only 2 minutes on Wednesday. So really, really big. It's really scary out there right now. I mean, I think they didn't amend it, so it also includes higher education, but I have to double check. So that means bathrooms at Case for me. And one of the complaints that we had a lot about that specific bill too is that it includes like field trips. And it's like, how are you going to make sure there's no single stall gender neutral bathroom on a field trip? Like, absolutely wild stuff. The executive rules are going to JCAR next week on Monday. But again, so it's a really difficult time because the JCAR rules, so how to get involved with that one, are very strict and stringent. It's more about implementation than not passing the order. And so that's really important to know. Like, I can't tell people to work on that one because it's like pretty much law-based at this point. Yeah, so it's all moving, but the important part is like you go on Instagram for one of these accounts, you know what's happening now, you know what you can do, and I think that's really, really critical.
Again, I would second all of the organizations just named. I'd also put in a plug for Kaleidoscope Youth Center. Our education and outreach department can support with a whole number of things. We can provide specifically like catered to you and your group, your organization training. And we also have like ready to go trainings that can be provided in person as well as virtual options. And now we have a selection of self-paced online offerings as well. But we also house the Ohio GSA network, which traditionally supports gender and sexuality alliances at the K-12, really high school generally level, but we're starting to explore a little bit what it looks like to offer more support to collegiate level higher ed students as well. So reach out to KYC if you're interested in doing that work and potentially helping shape how KYC makes that pivot or adds that into the wheelhouse of what we offer. We're really interested in supporting leadership across the state, and there's so many great folks on so many campuses across the state who are trying to do good work. And again, there's so much happening. We like truly are under attack. And so I would also just make the plug that all those organizations just named are largely run by folks from within the community. And we need accomplices because we're tired and we need help.
I think two more general campus resources I would recommend, just making students aware of, would be ombuds offices. The roles that they fill within confidentiality can often be a bit safer if there's been bias or marginalization in the academic setting. Many students don't know what that is at all until they come to me and they said, my other professor, really like took away points on this paper. I feel like it's related to what I said, not how I said it. So they're shocked to learn about that resource. The other would be acknowledging the limits that these offices have, as all do, but DEI offices, the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at John Carroll, for example, knitting together community amongst marginalized communities can be useful as well, so that it's not simply a silo of BIPOC individuals and a silo of LGBT individuals, etc., but that we can lift one another up in this process of learning, growing, and being protected. And the last thing I'll say, which is harder to act upon, but perhaps important to remember, is many of some of the most potent resources are going to be things that aren't on billboards. Queer folks, BIPOC folks, they find one another, and they create community in subversive ways that can lift them up. Things that aren't going to have a budget, things that aren't going to have a space, but can be critical to lifting folks up if they're not ready to step into those other spaces or even in addition to.
Yes, Harley and I were talking about the importance right now of just finding your people, finding community, and just digging into some of those old school practices. I am aware of our time, and of course, I have more questions, but also want to open it up to the audience and see if any of you have questions.
Come on up if you have questions.
Hold it, put on the stand. Hi guys. Hi, how's it going? I guess one of my questions is, are you getting a lot of feedback back there? I guess one of my questions is when in regards to you folks were talking about grace and kind of that communication part, particularly with things like microaggressions. And my question is, if somebody, again, not meaning to like hurt nobody, but they have convictions, they're not trying to be bombastic or anything, what can they do on the back end so that they don't get reported, lose their job or whatever? The reason I say that is because, hey, sometimes people have convictions. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, I'm a devoted Christian. I don't utilize pronouns whenever I, send out an email or anything like that. Got no hard feelings about anybody, but that's just how I do things. But how can I make sure that I don't get, called a hater or a bigot just because I don't do that and not get reported? Because I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings out here, but I got convictions. So I wondered how you guys would suggest to handle something like that.
I think I'd
Should I hand this back to the thing?
You can leave it up there. That's fine.
I'm going to start with a challenge to you, friend, that I think you probably do use pronouns in emails. You might not list your pronouns in your email signature, but we all use pronouns every day, right? If
Right.
I am emailing a group of folks and there's folks of multiple genders, I'm referring to them with their pronouns. I'm saying, hey, I asked Eli to complete this task. Did they get it done? I asked Samantha about this. Can she give an update on that? I asked Jim about this, and I need an update from him as well. So we're all using pronouns. So I just want to start there that yes, there is a specific way that we are asking folks to be respectful of pronouns.
Right.
But it's actually not too different from what we all do in our day-to-day lives. So I just wanted to name that. And I think I would urge you to consider where your convictions meet the ethics of serving the folks that you want to serve, helping the folks learn that you want to learn, and how can you stay true to your values and also, like you said, not cause harm. Where are you willing to be challenged and pushed, and where are you not? And if there are places where you are not willing to be challenged and pushed and that is causing harm to folks, I'd encourage some like really big reflection around that. I think it's very possible to hold multiple things to be true, to stand true in our own convictions, and to allow other people to stand true in their own and to stand in their identity. We can stay true to ourselves and let others do the same.
Okay. Yeah. I just want to throw in. Sorry, I lost my train of thought a little bit. Part I want to throw that in there is because, again, part of the conversation is grace. And when I look at grace, again, coming from my Christian convictions, that it's a mutual thing. Hey, we're both trying to figure some things out. So if that's just a very specific instance, but if somebody comes across like that, I don't want no trouble. And again, I'm not trying to be bombastic here, but hopefully you understand where I'm coming from. And, nobody's trying to get fired out here. So,
Yeah, don't get fired. I don't want you to get fired.
I got kids to feed.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have just a couple more thoughts. You're welcome. So first off, thank you for broaching a question that I imagine brought a little adrenaline into your body in this space. The second is I encourage folks in a similar space to have proactive conversation with your administration. What is my expectation? What is our policy? That's going to protect your employment. It's also hopefully going to create mutually understanding dialogue about why the policies are in place as they are. And I would hope that folks of all convictions, the policies are in place to protect our students. And that's the primary mission of our organizations. And the last would be kind of offering a resource, a book called Building Bridges by Father James Martin. He's a Jesuit priest. It's not focused on challenging biblical, specifically Catholic in that book, teachings on LGBT issues, but simply to say, how do we find mutual respect in this space when so many folks have been hurt? When I first came out, I was sort of offered with the choice of, am I going to be queer or am I going to be Christian? I can't be both. And I wonder if there's room to be Christian and allies. I wonder if there's room to be queer and Christian and to hold all of these different things together. So thank you for your question. Oh, you're all right. It's Building Bridges, something like dialogue between the LGBT community and the Catholic Church.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions?
I always have to lower the mic. I just wanted to ask more of a positive question about like your favorite experiences working with the populations that you get to work with.
I'll go. Yeah, I'll go. So last semester, I had the chance to work with a doctor providing hormone replacement therapy. And so, she'd go in and I actually shadowed a few of her appointments. And then she was just like, okay, you just go in after me. And it's nice because I wasn't required to be there. There was no policy on having they don't have a social worker in that clinic yet. But I would just go in right after and start talking to people. And I think as a social work student, it can be really intimidating to go in and talk to any patient or client that you're seeing. Like you're like, can I do the best job for this person? I don't know all the resources. I might just have to tell them that I'm going to talk to my supervisor. Like I have no idea. And so I think like every single time, even if there were high needs, I was met with the like answer, like it's really nice to talk to you, and I hope I get to talk to you again. And I think like one of my favorite things about what I'm doing is being a trans person working for trans people, and the kind of feeling that I know I get or have gotten growing up when I saw somebody like me who is doing the work to serve and help me. And so that's been really wonderful. Like, I don't know, we'd have a conversation where it just really didn't. I don't know, go anywhere, do much, and they'd be like, it was really nice to talk to you today. And I think that that is a really wonderful feeling.
I'm going to name two things. One is short and uncomplicated. The other one is longer and more complicated. The short and uncomplicated one is I got to just witness. It wasn't even really my work. I was just present at the drop-in center. But one of the programs that we offer is called GAP, Gender Affirmation Project, and we offer binders and gaffs and other gender affirming clothing to our young folks at no charge. And sometimes that means I get to be there when folks try on a binder for the first time. And there was one particular moment in which a young person went into one of our restrooms to try on a binder, check fit, came out to show their friend, showed the like flatness of their t-shirt, and just burst into sobs, and their friend immediately embraced them, hugged them, held them, told them how wonderful. I'm gonna cry just talking about it. And it's not always as emotional and heartfelt as that, but it is always really powerful. And I love being in a space where we get to have such lovely, powerful community moments together. The longer, more complicated one that I'll still try to be brief about is since I started at KYC, I've been working with a young person who is at a number of intersections, including being transmasculine and being autistic, and also just a laundry list of other mental health things and lots and lots of trauma. And when we first started working together, they were kind of fast-tracked onto my caseload because they were just like bouncing from crisis to crisis. They, at the time, really didn't have the support of their parents for their transition. They were not allowed to be out at home. They had attempted to be out at home and were basically told that that is simply not possible and will not be happening. And so they were, at the time, from the moment the drop-in center opened each day to the moment we closed, and often it was a really big challenge to get them to leave at the end of the day because where they had to go home to was not safe. And so we've been on an up and down roller coaster for the years that we've been working together. What makes this story complicated is I'm like celebrating that they have had a recent hospitalization, but I'm celebrating because it was a hospitalization that they chose. They have had some mental health symptoms pop up that they felt they needed a higher of care for, and those symptoms were not suicidality. There are other things unrelated because in the time that we've worked together, in the time that they've been working with their parents to try and come to a common ground about who they are, building community at KYC, so much has changed. They've been able to access hormones. They've been able to access top surgery. They have legally changed their name. They told me in the process of our risk assessment, deciding whether they needed to go to the hospital or not, that they actually don't feel any amount of hopelessness for the future. And that is just,
Thank you.
that would have been unimaginable before. And so I just want to name that, like, so much is possible, even in the climate that we're in, even in with all of the things that are happening, huge change is possible, and getting to see that is so
Thank you,
powerful.
Savannah. Thank you for being so transparent. And again, last but not least, Dr. Joe.
So I am also going to do two. We're
Nice.
greedy up here.
We're coming against time, so
Yes, they will both be brief, I assure you. One is probably the more selfish of the two, which is getting to be an adult in a space with a young person that I didn't have. growing up very conservatively Catholic, any queer person was hiding themselves for safety reasons. And I used to use language like the gay agenda. And so I have to reckon with that. But it's a joy to get to just let young people see that adults exist who are LGBTQ and who are joyful. One of the questions was, how do we share LGBT joy? So that's a gift for me. And then I think the other is walking adults through the question of, am I blank enough? Am I trans enough? Am I valid enough? Am I brave enough? And I think enoughness is something we all face challenges with. But I had an example, a client say, I use they and them pronouns. And I said, okay, what makes that kind of resonate for you? What fits? And the client said, well, actually, I feel like she and her are who I am, but I don't feel worthy to ask for that yet. So to hold that space and have it be heartbreaking, but also then like, okay, do you want me to use she and her here? I'm not telling anybody. And watching that joy and also confusion of just how do I put this together in my mind.
Thank you so much. We are at time.
Can I do a really quick one, please? It would be bad.
We're at time. I'm sorry.
I'll catch up with you.
Yes, definitely touch our panelists. I thank you for being here, taking the time, and just again your transparency. This work is not easy, and so I really hope that once you leave here, that you are doing something fun and pleasurable. And thank all of you for your engagement. We appreciate you.